Hello, everyone. Welcome to Google Cloud Next. Today, we're going to talk to you about BeyondProd in action and how you can scale policy enforcement across all of your cloud native workloads. My name is Anush Saburi. I'm a group product manager with Google Cloud. And today, I'm honored to have Christian Gorke, the head of Cyber Center of Excellence, Big Data, and Advanced Analytics from Commerzbank. Today's talk will have 4 parts. We'll start with introducing the problem and the BeyondProd approach. We'll talk then later about how you can move to BeyondProd principles. And as part of that, obviously, you need identity. So we'll spend a little bit of time about managed workload identity and certificates. And we'll finish the talk with an interview with Christian. All right, let's start with the problem statement. As applications are modernized, the problem of authorization becomes much harder. Consider this shopping example that has 3 different parts. One part of it is the one that shows the catalog of the products that may be running on compute engine. It talks to some backend data warehouse like a Cloud Big Data or MongoDB. The second part of the app that may run on a GKE cluster is responsible for dealing with credit cards, signing up, processing credit cards. So as part of that, it has to be able to communicate with Equifax to get your credit score or Commerzbank to do credit card processing. And then there is potentially some part of the app that deals with sign up and logins. This may be running on Cloud Function and can talk to different types of IDPs. And then, of course, the app can have components running on other clouds, for example, to track the sales leads, or can have components running on-prem. And of course, the app has to communicate with its users that are running on multiple devices, right? As you can imagine, each of these access paths that you see in this diagram are a potential area that authorization policies have to be enforced, right? And as the app gets modernized, these number of data paths are exponentially increasing, right? And so the authorization becomes a much harder problem. If you want to think about this, there are 4 main use cases for authorization based on the diagram we just saw. One is accessing cloud resources and APIs and services. The second is accessing to the APIs that the app exposes. The third category is access to the data that may be classified and needs special attention. And the fourth one is the federated access. In this example was the case where the app was communicating with likes of Commerzbank or Equifax. So what is the current approach to do this is what we call it embedded authorization. In this model, the application is packaged with all the policy and resource definition it needs such that it can make the policy or access decision locally within the app, right? And as part of this model, the application developer has to put all this information inside the app as part of building the application. So what are the problems with this existing embedded authorization problem, right? First is compliance, right? As a compliance officer, it's very hard to prove to an auditor that all of your applications are following what the regulators require because every application has its own policy language. Second, consistency. It's very difficult as a security or platform admin to assert that the security posture of your company is consistent across all applications because every application has taken its own path to enforce policy. The third is the developer effort is high. What that means is that as a developer, you need to also ramp up on the security side and be able to embed this authorization policy into your application. That means less time spent on developing the core business logic and more time spent on building this policy into your system. And lastly, policy updates take a long time. As a CISO, as you're exposed to new regulatory requirements, you need to be able to update your policies based on that. And because every application has its own policy, it's going to take much longer to do so. So what is the solution there? Google has had many years of experience in this space. We advocate for zero trust principles in terms of moving to these modernized workloads. And there are 3 pillars that we advocate as part of that. We published a paper called BeyondProd that summarizes our thinking behind this. And basically it's based on creating an identity for services, having a centralized policy, and of course using dynamic context to make sure that the identity and access of the service is continuously verified. To be more laser focused as part of the policy part of these 3 pillars, BeyondProd paper requires the availability of a centralized policy management, which creates consistent policy enforcement and as a result, more observability. Let's have a look on what that means from an application perspective. So this is how, as we discussed, an embedded authorization system would look like. Moving to BeyondProd principles would basically means that you modernize your authorization very similar to how you modernize your application. You would have a centralized policy governance model that centrally stores your policies, and there is a centralized authorization as a service, if you will, that allows applications to have a callback and be able to enforce them in a centralized way. So, and this gives you a lot of benefit that we discussed this, but before we go there, I want to call out two things. This kind of model is very suitable for policies that are applicable to all kinds of applications, more like a coarse-grained policies. This model still allows for embedded authorization or localized authorization to happen for policies that are more fine-grained and applicable to certain apps. The second thing is that while this model provides a centralized policy governance model, it doesn't mean that every access policy is a callback to a centralized service, right? To minimize the latency, obviously there are going to be localized policy decision point that runs next to the workloads, but the idea is to have the at least governance and storage centralized. With this model, there are three benefits that you can immediately see. Number one is that the policy enforcement, there is a consistent context-based policy enforcement, which reduces the data exfiltration risk across all of the critical applications. The second part is the streamlined compliance. With this, you get full visibility to all of the policy applied in your applications. And lastly, there is a reduced developer effort, meaning that the application developer can focus on the core business logic and let security team manage a centralized policy story. To kind of show you what are our thinking, we've built an actual POC to show you what can be achieved with this authorization as a service. Let's have a quick look. For this demo, we have deployed a sample bookstore application on GKE leveraging a 3-node cluster. We will show how easy it is to leverage a centralized authorization service to update the access policies of the application and limit access to expert book reviews to product page service and premium user. We have already deployed STO in this GKE cluster to help with deploying envoys, which enforce the policies. We've also configured external AuthZ of STO to point to our federated policy decision points deployed in the cluster via the control plane. All right, let's navigate to the bookstore application. As you can see, the expert reviews are not accessible currently. Logged in with Tony. This is because the product page is not allowed to call into the expert book review service. Now let's make a policy change in our policy file and enable access to the expert book reviews by the product page. We do this by leveraging SPIFFE identity of the product page service account, as highlighted here. Note that the policy already allows expert reviews to be accessed by the premium user, as you can see from here. All right, let's go ahead and make the change in the policy to allow access to the product page service accounts and commit the changes. Okay, as you can see from this dashboard, the policy change in the above file triggers a new build process, which then pushes the new policy to the decision engines that are already deployed on GKE nodes. This is very important because that gives you an automatic policy deployment across your environments. Obviously, it's going to take a few seconds for it to be propagated everywhere. And this dashboard is a great way to know when that actually happens. And once the policies are deployed, we can check to see if it actually works. All right. To do this, we can switch back to the application. Here's the app. And here we have a user logged in as a non-premium user. And even though the product page has access to the book reviews, the user is still not a premium user, so they cannot see the product reviews. If you were to switch to a premium user, in this case, Tony, voila, the book reviews will show up. And that's it. That's our demo. Thank you. All right. So let's do a recap of what you just saw, right? With this demo, there are 3 quick benefits that are easy to see. Number one is the policy governance follows a GitHub-like model, almost like a policy as code. So that's very helpful. Number 2, the automatic policy push across all of your GKE apps. That is also very seamless. And number 3 is a centralized dashboard that shows the status of the deployment of the policies and the audit trails that it can create for your auditors, right? So those are easy to see from just the demo. But obviously, this demo is just proof of concept for you to see our thinking behind authorization as a service. But of course, we want to expand upon that. One direction that is very important is a consistent policy enforcement across all of our environments, GCE, serverless, and so on. The second direction is around policy governance. We want to provide advanced policy governance like policy intelligence, dry run, and dark launch. And lastly, is covering more use cases. If you remember from the slide at the beginning, there are 4 main use cases. We want to make sure that all those access policies are included in our story, right? So including things like access to GCP APIs and so on. All right, we talked a lot about authorization and how one can think about modernizing it, but let's step back a little bit and go back to the BeyondProd principles and how one can think about moving to those principles, right? In our thinking, this is a 5-step approach. Number 1 is to create an inventory of all of the workloads that run in your environment, right? This is very important to know your baseline. Once you have the baseline, the second part is monitoring the behavior, understanding that how these workloads communicate with each other. For example, this workload tends to work with the other one because it's running my front-end web application. Once you have that inventory and that graph of workload communication, this is time to come and organize them and create identity. For example, this group is running my HR web application, and so they all belong to the same namespace. And then step number 4 is designing the policies for those namespaces and trust domains that you created in step number 3. And do dry run to make sure that they're doing the right thing. And once you kind of have confidence about the policy, actually enforcing them. And this repeats itself as the new services discovered or the policy intelligence recommends new policies or new acquisitions happening, right? And today we covered these 2 parts, step number 4 and 5, as part of the authorization experience. And we also have a little bit of announcement in the step number 3, which is the identity and the credential. So we call this the managed workload identity and certificates. And the kind of the idea and the mission is very simple. Create a seamless mTLS authentication across all of your environments, whether it's a GCE or a GKE or a Cloud Run or even other clouds. You want to make sure that you have a seamless experience to create identity for workloads where you don't have to think about it, right? The way we think about identity in this schema is using SPIFFE, which is a standard way of doing this, a grouping basically of workloads. And the way to express the credential in this kind of mindset is using certificates, right? And using mutual TLS as a way to authenticate the 2 together, right? Last year, we announced the availability of a managed workload identity and certificates for GKE. Today, we're happy to announce the availability of private preview for a similar thing for GCE. The idea is that every GCE VM would natively have a SPIFFE digital certificate that it can be used to communicate with other VMs. And these certificates are automatically rotated every 12 hours and are issued through our other service called Certificate Authority Service. This is very similar to the work we did last year for GKE, where every pod would get a similar certificate that is also rotated every 12 hours, also issued from Certificate Authority Service. As you can imagine, we're trying to make this as seamless as possible when it comes to GCP platform. All right, now that we talked about BeyondProd principles, the move to BeyondProd, and what are the steps that a customer can take to get there, I think it's a great time to go back to Christian and ask some questions about their journey to Zero Trust Workloads at Commerzbank. All right, hello, Christian, and thank you so much for joining us. Why don't we start quickly by you talking about yourself, your role at Commerzbank, and what you're responsible for.
Yeah, well, first of all, thank you very much for having me here and welcome everyone to this talk. I am Christian Gorke, heading the Cyber Center of Excellence at Commerzbank. And who's Commerzbank? Well, Commerzbank is the leading bank for the German Mittelstand. That is a strong partner for approximately 11 million private and small business customers in Germany. We have a client-focused portfolio of financial services in 2 segments, private and small business customers, as well as corporate clients. We focus on personal advisory offering, consistent customer focus, comprehensive digitalization, profitability before growth, and sustainability. And now, how does Commerzbank and GCP connect? Well, Commerzbank is increasingly using cloud technology to bring new products and customer experiences to the market faster, do a better performance of its systems, leverage new technology, and reduce running costs. And since 2019, we are leveraging Google Cloud with its help to bring Commerzbank's applications to their infrastructure. And second, Google Cloud supports Commerzbank to make its journey into a cloud transformed organization, innovate new solutions for the bank. So, but what about my role at Commerzbank? Me specifically, as I said, I'm heading the Cyber Center of Excellence as part of the BDA, Big Data and Advanced Analytics key area at Commerzbank. And my team has specifically two tasks. The first task is we run our own developed cloud enterprise suite. That is, we built a suite which makes the Google Cloud more suitable, or actually makes it suitable for financial applications, including products, managed services, and so on. And second, we support our businesses to form the right architecture, do engineering, processes, and more, like security and data protection, to go to the cloud. So in the last 2 years, we have supported around 100 of these use cases, and I want to give you two brief examples. One is digital account analysis, which enables the bank and the customers to work together to process applications for loans more quickly, to create balance sheets, and to optimize their income. While at the other hand, TalkBot, another example, enables internal processes and makes them more natural to communicate.
Great, and thank you for all that introduction. So when it comes to workload security, what are some common challenges that you face in your daily work?
Yeah, so great question. So what you would not maybe imagine when talking to a bank is that actually banking becomes technology as of today. So the business of a bank builds upon creating, selling, servicing products with a digital foundation. This means the business of a bank is actually using technology to create and distribute information. So this is actually quite similar to what a technology company does. You manage large amounts of digital information, use artificial intelligence and machine learning to process your data efficiently. And therefore, data security becomes essential to protect and manage our assets. And what does this now mean for our daily workload security challenges? Mm-hmm. Well, we have multiple ones. Let me give you some examples. One is a workload migration. Traditional workloads are difficult to migrate to the cloud because of the different infrastructure. Then what Anush also mentioned with respect to identities, workload identities and zero trust. Identities are handled differently across multiple environments. So think of think of service accounts, think of user accounts, which have different contexts. Then workload encryption. We need to make sure that each workload is encrypted in a correct way. It's great that Google offers out-of-the-box encryption for all its services, but as a bank, you want to know the last mile be in your own hands. So this is something we need to do. And we need to have workload separation when we separate between different applications on the cloud with respect to identities or their businesses.
I see. No, this is very important. And the last mile encryption, I think we've talked about this at length, but the scale of how Commerzbank runs this environment is just mind-blowing. And so I can only appreciate how complex this could be. Now, let's talk a little bit about your principles. When you think about future of security designs, what are those principles that you think the bank should follow?
Yeah, great point. So actually, to talk about the future of the security principles or security design, I guess we could spend a long time on it. But let's try to summarize it in a few points. So first of all, the main point is we want to leverage future-proof, fully managed services, but configured to our security requirements. This means you use the usual benefits of cloud, like it needs to be scalable, it needs to be elastic, it needs to be available on demand, location independent, accessible, and, which is very important for us, comes with a high security capability. So this means what we need, actually what we want to have in the future is we want to have a global inventory, which is necessary to identify all assets, all artifacts and their life cycles. Plus, we want to adapt to existing and new threats coming along with respect to network security, endpoint security, data security, you name it. And last but not least, which is also very important, we want to have engineered in security combined with autonomic security instead of manual one. So let me give you two day-to-day examples. One is we leverage certificate authority service from Google. This, as part of a zero trust architecture, enables us to establish our company-based trust in the public cloud, scalable and automated. This means that we can rely on, for example, mutual TLS and authorizations, which can follow the least privilege principle. And second, virtual private cloud service controls. This means, imagine we have confidential data, so we have private data in a public cloud, and so we do not want that two separate applications talk to each other without authorization. We do not even want that that an application within different stages can talk to each other. So imagine development and production should not talk to each other. So in other words, data exfiltration and lateral data movement need to be restricted, and this is where we also use VPC service controls for. So this is the part of future-proof fully managed services. Now with respect to our security requirements, that comes down to what we call our 3Ds or continuous compliance. So we define security in a specific manner. We detect whenever something on the cloud deviates from this default configuration. And last but not least, the last three is default, to set it back to default or to apply some kind of notification because we cannot or do not want to set everything back to default. So combining everything of this, we need the help from Google to get this fully managed services, and then we bring our own expertise with our own developed solutions to get the security requirements in.
That makes a lot of sense. And I think just to add to this, maybe you kind of spend a little bit of time on this one too, but like what are the thinking behind zero trust approach when it comes to workloads? I think you kind of touched upon this as part of certificate authority service and VPC service control, but if there's anything else you would like to add.
Yeah. So, I mean, if you look in this, first, what we need to do or what we plan to do is to move completely or to move partly from traditional infrastructure to zero trust security. This means, I mean, you know, you have a huge enterprise, you have a huge IT landscape. So we want to have a verified service-to-service communication instead of implicit trust given by a network, which can be quite static, but this isn't the case in a dynamic environment like the cloud. And second, we want to build a new foundation for years to come. For workloads, what you just asked for, this means the following, which is quite similar to what you mentioned earlier. First, no matter the context, there must be policies defined and are enforced. So we need consistent context-based policy enforcement. Second, with respect to the 3Ds I just mentioned, we need to fulfill the requirements and policies needed to be compliant, but at the same and it needs to be scalable and auditable for the auditors to verify that we actually doing everything the way we need to do. And last but not least, what we call work focus. This is where developers actually can do their work. Business analysts can do their work. They don't have to take care about this part of security. We want to enable them to work on their focus. So what we want to have in the end is something like policy governance as a GitOps or Git operations, which is automatically published across all of Google Cloud because it's done in a standardized way. And best would be to have a dashboard in the end to monitor everything. And I think this is where we can utilize the solution you just mentioned, because imagine a use case where we have different partner systems connecting to our data, let's say from their on-premise systems, from different platforms, and we work together to fulfill a common use case. And now suddenly we can do that. And while we can do this as of today, maybe too, if we invest a lot of resources, I guess what you just presented will relieve a lot of burden from us to maintain a cloud-native authorization across all the systems.
Oh, that's great to hear, Christian. And what a great story. I mean, when you think about 11 million internal partners, one can imagine the scale that you have to run on. And I would imagine having platform, taking some of these burdens out of the way would be super helpful. Again, thank you so much, Christian, for being such a great partner and also joining our talk today, giving such great insights into your operation and your thinking. Before we wrap it up, let me give you some resources that may be useful. Starting with certificate authority service, there are two things that we want to announce to you. One is availability of a whole bunch of mini videos that talks about certificate authority service capabilities. These are short videos, 2 to 3 minutes. So there's a link in there to the playlist on YouTube. And the second is we're today announcing the availability of CA service integration with Cloud Certificate Manager in public preview. This allows you to have a managed TLS certificate story for your load balancers. Previously, Cloud Certificate Manager supported public certs. With this integration, we're bringing private cert support to the mix. And lastly, if you're interested to learn more about the two concepts we brought today, one, authorization as a service, there is a link on the left side where you can express interest, and we'll keep you in loop about all of our updates and changes, and if you want to sign up for our previews. And second, manage workload identity and certificates. Again, another form over there. If you want to show interest, we'll do the same thing as authorization as a service. And that's about it. Thank you so much for tuning in, and hope to see you soon in future.